Hello, I'm Renee with Reset with Renee, and I'm so glad you're joining me. If you have traveled the path of learning about narcissistic abuse, then you know a few things already. You probably have a PhD in what narcissism is and isn't, and how it's impacted you. And so, what I want to talk about today is the impact on you. And I have my own healing journey around narcissistic abuse recovery. And it's been like a trail of breadcrumbs over the course of my life, professionally and personally. And so, what I've pulled together today is just an overview of that breadcrumb journey. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about what I can offer to you in terms of services. So, this is what we're going to talk about: the what and how of CPTSD recovery. And CPTSD stands for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which basically means that a person with CPTSD has had a number of situations where there was abuse, neglect, and other things that happened to them layered repetitively over time. And so it's not just a single PTSD sort of diagnosis, it's very complex and layered. So, what we'll talk about is, or what I'll talk about with you is here, it's the challenge of having CPTSD, having grown up in an environment with narcissism, the journey to healing, the gifts of healing. I'm going to share with you all a little bit about my own personal journey and milestones and the things I wish I had known much sooner, like years and decades ago. Because my mission is to help people recover from CPTSD and narcissistic abuse much faster than what my journey has been. And then, like I said, the offerings. So, if you've been around folks with the kind of personalities that fit with narcissism, or you've been around people who engage in harmful behaviors, it's a challenge. It impacts your whole being, system, and relationships. So, I just want to emphasize, none of us, and I put myself in that bucket, we didn't ask for this. And so it feels unfair. We were just born into it. And we've had generations of hurt projected onto us. And when we were young, we couldn't fix it. And perhaps as adults, we can't fix it either. In terms of like the people that we know within our ecosystem. But the truth is, if you're watching this presentation, you're here. I'm here, you're here, we survived. And the folks that I work with, my clients, it's like, it is our turn to live. Let's go for it. But first, we have to often go back and do some healing work. So this is just the truth of having CPTSD and having grown up in an environment with narcissism and other issues. There was abuse and neglect. Abuse can be so many different ways, right? It can be physical, it can be emotional, sexual, financial, social. And then neglect for my clients is much harder to come to terms with because it's sort of like an invisible wound that's created early and on repeat. But when you grow up in an environment with neglect, it's just part of your normal. And so you don't know it's not normal until you get to be a little bit older. And so abuse and neglect leave an imprint of shame. It leaves wounds from having been hurt. And it also leaves unmet needs. Developmentally, we all have needs for relationship, for physical health and well-being, and for emotional health and well-being. And when we have one or more parents who are suffering from generational trauma, basically, you're not going to be met in an attuned kind of way. And so that's just part of the package, unfortunately, that we were born into. And so because we were young and we were defenseless, our nervous systems are so intelligent, they adapt and they cope to help take care of us. And so a lot of the responses that we have as adults really began back in childhood, infancy, even possibly in utero. And so the clients that I work with, they're looking at They're functioning in their work, in their relationships, in their family. They're looking at their health. They're looking all around and going, how am I coping? And is my coping helping me or harming me? And a lot of coping or protective or survival mechanisms really are intelligent and helpful when you're in a dangerous situation. But later in life, it sort of stacks up against you and starts to create more problems. And so in this kind of family environment, you're going to have missed developmental lessons. So that's sort of the irony and the paradox of CPTSD. There can be parts of you that are so overdeveloped, super functioning, highly perfectionistic. I'm just giving a couple examples. Or there can be parts of you that just feel like you never got the lessons you're supposed to get. You have no idea what you're doing. In fact, one of the things that clients say to me most often when I'm asking them questions is, I don't know. It's just a stuck, frozen response. And so with all of this, as people mature and become adults, they'll notice they'll have health issues with their physical health. That's often a reason why people seek coaching or counseling with me, is because their health has taken a hit and their doctors referred them. They could have mental health issues in terms of having been diagnosed with something like bipolar or ADHD or any other kind of label or diagnoses. And so oftentimes people are unaware that the symptoms that they have a root cause of trauma at the base. And then, of course, ruptured relationships. When we've missed developmental milestones, when we have wounds and we have unmet needs, oftentimes we end up in relationships that aren't the best or the healthiest for us. And so all of this combined leaves adults, unfortunately, susceptible to even more trauma in adulthood because of the secondary, because of the survival coding. So we'll say some more about that. So I want you to know you are not alone. You are a cycle breaker. And it is a tough call. It is a hero's call. And those kind of calls aren't for the weak of heart. And so in our culture, no matter where you are, like right now I live in the South, I used to live in the Midwest. I mean, culturally, we are taught in our families, in our schools, in our churches, and the systems that we are a part of to disconnect and turn away from ourselves to fit the norm, to get in the square box, if you will. And so, unfortunately, we don't do well as families, as a healthcare system, in meeting people where they're at and meeting their needs and tending their hurts. So it's really mass avoidance by individuals, families, and systems. So one of the biggest things that you are invited to do for recovery is really to lean in, to turn inside, connect inside, and begin to get more familiar and connected with that which you have disconnected from in survival mode. And I have here a healthcare system, helpful or harmful. I've had both. Most people I talk to have had both. A diagnosis, a label can be really helpful. For instance, when I learned about narcissism, not as a professional in graduate school, but much later in life when I entered the dating scene and had real world examples of it, personally, I was like, oh, okay, that diagnosis I learned about in grad school makes so much more sense right now, unfortunately. CPTSD is the same. It's not even approved in the DSM, which makes it hard to get treatment for it covered. There's a whole lot of issues around that. But yet, when something sort of fits, it gives you that aha, and it helps guide you on a path of, well, what do I do next? So that can be helpful, but it can also be a sticking point of recovery oftentimes has to go beyond the label. So I focus less on the narcissism and more on the CPTSD recovery. So that brings us to the invitation. And one of my mentors says, if it's in you, it's for you. And that is a tough sell. I'm not going to lie. There is some inner pushback and resistance that is expected and predictable. So let me just break this down for you. Your trauma that you got in your family of origin or wherever you were on the receiving end of narcissistic abuse, it wasn't your fault. And I know it's unfair. The good news is you can respond now. Gabor Mate talks about responsibility as a definition of it's our ability to respond. So now that we're mature adult humans, we have the ability to respond. And oftentimes when we have been on the victimization side of things, where things have been unfair and we've suffered on repeat, there can be a strong urge to get justice, to get revenge even. And so what I have found to be true is that nothing will erase the past or right the wrongs more than your recovery. And your recovery is the ultimate win. So now let's talk a little bit about the journey of CPTSD recovery. What I know is that each and every one of you, if you've chosen recovery, if you're investigating, you're curious, you have heart warrior spirit. You are unstoppable. Some days you may want to collapse and give up, but in your core, you are not meant for that. You're meant for something bigger and better. So the people I work with are heart warriors. They're superheroes, truly. They have lived through some of the worst things and situations, and they're coming out on the other side. And it's a journey. So part of that journey is the awareness, right, of your survival coping mechanisms or strategies or impulses no longer work as well, or worse, they are creating more problems for you, newer problems, additional problems. And so it's really an invitation to awaken to the truth of the present, wherever you are. You may have made decisions years, decades ago, for which you are now needing to reckon with. So awakening to the truth of what the past was for you and how it's contributed to your present. And so really embracing the invitation to heal, recover, and break the cycle. If you are the adult child of a narcissist, you are coming from a lineage of generational trauma, and it has been dumped and projected generation to generation to generation. And a lot of folks, like myself, Gen X, we're raising the next generation. And so I look at it as a sacred call to break the cycle moving forward. So, and to do that, it's not easy. It's not light work. And so it's important to have support, whether that's an individual coach or therapist, but certainly a community of like-minded survivors. And I'm going to emphasize with a focus on evolution, meaning, yes, we've been victimized. There's a story about that. We need to have our story, vocalize our story, have a safe place to do that, fully honor everything that has happened, and we want to cross over to the other side. We don't want to stay stuck in the story. And that is a whole next level invitation. So some of the things that can really help your healing journey just in general is education and information, anything for your mind that you can digest in any form that pleases you, books, professional services, social media, podcasts, and then having experiences of attunement, someone who can hold space for you, witness and honor, really lean in to connect with all the aspects of you that need that desperately. And then you want to build a toolbox, daily structures and practices that help you build your awareness, build your own attunement and regulation. Most of us are walking around with really whacked nervous systems. So repairing your nervous system is a process. And then doing some parts work, which is a whole nother topic, but how do you get to those wounded parts of you and tend to them? How do you unburden them? And then how do you go to the next level? You do that by unburdening, integrating, and embodying. So that's stuff that I talk about in more detail in spaces and places where there's more time. And you want to address each aspect of your being. A lot of people, when they're in talk therapy, just speak, and that's helpful. Just hearing yourself speak can be helpful. Being witnessed is helpful. But we have to go beyond our thinking brains and CPTSD recovery and get to the body, the heart, the spirit, the soul. We have to sort of purify our energy, if you will. We need to look at our health. Oftentimes we have to re-examine finances and our sexuality. There's places where there's been injury and wounding. And so those are all important aspects. And so doing all of this work, the releasing, the reclaiming, the restoring, that truly is recovery. So now on to the gifts of recovery. Because wherever there's pain and hurt and loss underneath it, there's a bucket full of gold just waiting to be discovered. And most people don't think about it that way. Again, because of that avoidance that we have in our culture. But truly, you are the one you've been waiting for. In fact, you guys, there's a book by that title written by Richard Schwartz. Read that several years ago. And so, what we do with CPTSD recovery is reconnect to our soul, our spirit. We find our unique essence and expertise and we reinstate it. We get back into a sovereign state of being, out of that victimization into the sovereign. So as we do this, we find we have more spaciousness, we thrive instead of survive, we create more of what we want in our lives, and we really call that in. So some survivors get hooked in the victim story and they're calling out the problem. And that is needed. But for your personal recovery, we want to get you to a place where you're calling in your take to life and moving forward. So in this space, you'll find less internal conflict, more ease in your relationships. You'll move from that survivor victim mindset to one of superhero, champion, the one, the heart warrior. And as you evolve to that place, you will naturally bring your gifts to the collective, your family, your community, and larger. So there's a real ripple effect of healing for all. Even if the people in your family or ecosystem aren't on a healing journey, you, just by doing your recovery and healing, are a gift, whether they realize it or not. And then this is kind of like a time bender aspect of CPTSD recovery. We really can heal our lineage backwards and forwards. So when I say you're a cycle breaker, that's what that means. Not only are you dealing with you and your life story and the impact of that, but you are healing backwards, you are healing forwards. I'm going to share a few personal milestones. Want each and every one of you to understand that you're not broken and there's nothing wrong with you. That is something that is said often when I work with folks who are on a CPTSD recovery journey. And here's just a few things. There's a plethora, but a few things that really kind of got my journey started. The Body Keeps the Score is a book. Gabor Mate, I checked out his Wisdom of Trauma series. I've always followed attachment style work. I was drawn to internal family systems, which is IFS for short. I did level 1 and level 2 and kind of got stuck on my own healing journey until I saw and found other people who were talking about how to heal CPTSD with IFS and that it required another or a different set of skills. So that's invaluable. NORM, neuro emotional relational technique, I believe it's called. Polyvagal theory looks at our nervous system. There's somatic work, inner child work. I trained in psychedelic assisted therapy. That's a bridge that some people use for their recovery. And breath work has been probably one of the most impactful things that I've done personally with my journey. And then here's the thing. I lean into coaching because the clinical side is helpful. I mean, I have 2 degrees. I have a master's degree. I'm licensed in 2 states. I've been doing therapy for years. I've been on a healing and discovery journey for forever. But sometimes that can only take you so far. So here's sampling of things that have helped me personally in my recovery journey. And these are things that I build into some of the offerings that I have. Human design and gene keys, elemental medicine, stuff that other people might consider woo and non-clinical, like tarot or astrology, psychedelics, body work, and any kind of spiritual practice, ancestry and lineage healing, and connecting to nature. All of these things are so important because one of the most common wounds that folks have is around belonging. And so these are ways that you can reconnect and have a sense of belonging. You also want to identify anchors of safety, love, connection, belonging, and joy. That's something I help my clients do. I always recommend getting pictures, if you can, of yourself and framing them, putting them in visible places where you see them often, as well as any family members that you kind of struggle with, living or deceased. And to work on tracking your activation when you feel positive, when you feel negative, when you feel neutral. How's your nervous system functioning? What parts of you are activated? What wounds are being hit? What needs are begging for your attention? What fears are activated? So there's a lot of moving parts, literally and metaphorically, in CPTSD work. I refer to CPTSD work as doing the archaeological dig. It's like an iceberg. And so you know the tip of the iceberg, but there's all this stuff underneath the surface that you need to get to. And sometimes in CPTSD healing, it's like you got to put on the scuba gear and do a deep dive to the bottom of the ocean floor to get to the wounded parts of you. And so sometimes we need activation to get there. Music, movies, movement can all be ways to activate something that you have buried down. Guided or assisted journeys to connect. Super helpful with getting to those wounded parts of you, as well as connecting to your gifts. So always noticing and honoring your needs, noticing activation, looking for glimmers of good is so important when you're on a healing journey. Journaling can be helpful. Any kind of bilateral activation. So that could be EMDR or binaural beats or anything that has you using both sides of your body and alternating. Breath work I mentioned. A key piece is unwinding your survival coding and learning a new context. A lot of CPTSD survivors are really have strong fear-based frequencies that they live under. So we want a new context for that. Believing in your own healing power and medicine is also important and hard for survivors to wrap their heads and hearts around. It's nice if you can get to a place of forgiveness, although that is something that usually comes at the end of the healing journey for most people. And certainly our goal is more empowerment, embodiment, and ease. What I wish I knew sooner. I was trained level 1 and level 2 in IFS, or internal family systems, but it really came together for me when I learned about the energetic signature of various parts. And this is sort of like IFS combined with polyvagal theory. And so these are 4 here. So I can't, I won't, I must, I will destroy. You may have different languaging in your own system, but it's the frequency of drivenness, collapse, hell no, I will ruin you, I'm done. And then, of course, when we are not in protective part energy and we're at our core connected, the words I am really do resonate. Learning that was huge. Another thing I learned is that healing can't be done in your head. You got to really get underneath the bobblehead effect and connect to your body, the energy, the heart, the spirit. Healing cannot be transactional, meaning I'm doing this to get that. It's got to be more open-hearted. From an IFS lens, while we are trying to help the wounded parts, it's usually the protective parts of us, our survival mechanisms, our coping strategies that are the hardest aspect to work with. And once you get permission from them to reorient, things tend to unfold a little bit more smoothly. And then the other piece is we get to know our own system, and we already know like protective parts of other people's system. That's why you're in this presentation. So learning how to be in your personal power and boundaried in an embodied way is super helpful. A lot of the teaching out there on boundaries is put you in a place of being protective led, which does not help those boundaries land. And you get pushback, which then makes the whole thing harder. So learning that getting activated doesn't mean that you're a failure. Actually, it means it's a measure of success. You've created more safety and trust within your system so that you can connect and feel more and access more at deeper levels. There is definitely reprocessing of emotional states that probably were under processed, such as grief, fear, shame, and anger. Like I said, light stuff, right? And then we want to understand coercive control strategies. I mean, that is like some of the favorite tools in the narcissist toolbox. And so having a clear understanding of what that looks like, sounds like, feels like, and how we are going to respond and not react to that is very empowering. And then plugging up energy leaks. So we, to be empowered, want to stay away from blaming, shaming, creating separation of like someone's better, someone's worse, and getting in power struggles with people. And again, there's a focus on calling in what is good for us and good for others, as opposed to calling out and putting negative attention on others. So here we go into some of the offerings. If you want to take just individual classes, you may be interested in pathways and portals. Those will be offerings that you can consume just at your own pace. And then if you would like a full-bodied, all the way in experience, then you'd be looking at the bridge container. And so if you follow me, I'm going to give you my contact here. If you follow me, then what I'd ask you to do is to sign up for my email, and we can start getting connected. Certainly invite you to follow me on social media at Reset with Renee. And as I offer things, then you'll be the first to know. And so some of the things I have in the works would be some courses. One would be Discover You, where we dive into human design and gene keys. And then this one here, I'm working on the title, but Create Your Own Medicine. And then third, it's going to be a major bulk of healing, is Own Your Story. And then kind of the next level would be another big chunk of healing, which is Evolve, Empower, and Elevate. I'd like to thank you for your attention, following along with this presentation. It's a lot of information in a short period of time. I have so much more I want to share with you. And again, I hope you'll accept the invitation to follow me and to connect with me and hopefully work with me. I'd love to get to know you, hear your story, and witness your transformation.